The moment my husband signed those papers, he stopped owning the only clean part of his empire. The diner smelled like burned coffee and wet asphalt. Somewhere behind the counter, an old refrigerator hummed loud enough to fill the silence between us. Graham Vale sat across from me in the cracked vinyl booth wearing the same charcoal wool coat he always wore to meetings when he expected bad news. Rainwater darkened the shoulders. His tie hung loose now, the top button of his shirt undone like he had finally run out of energy to pretend he was still in control. Outside, the Baltimore harbor disappeared behind freezing fog and sodium yellow dock lights. Midnight was 15 minutes away. So was the end of our marriage. You should have eaten something, Graham said without looking up from the papers. His voice sounded rough, like sandpaper dragged over concrete. I almost smiled at that. 8 years together, and this was still how he loved people. Not with apologies. Not with softness. With reminders. Food. Gas in the car. Bills paid before I saw them. I wrapped both hands around the ceramic coffee mug, even though the coffee had gone cold an hour ago. My fingers stayed steady. That surprised me, because hidden inside the sleeve of my cardigan was another fountain pen. Navy blue. Nearly identical to the one resting beside Graham's right hand. I am not hungry, I said quietly. The waitress passed by with tired eyes and refilled his soda without asking. Graham thanked her automatically. Even exhausted, he still sounded dangerous when he spoke. Not loud. Never loud. Just controlled enough to make everyone else lower their voices. I watched him flip through the final pages of the divorce packet. The paper edges brushed against his knuckles. Small cuts crossed two of his fingers. Port work. Container locks. Sleepless nights. He had not slept properly in weeks. I knew because I used to hear him pacing the apartment at 3 in the morning, while the radio whispered weather reports from the kitchen counter. Vincent says this should be straightforward, he muttered. Straightforward. The word almost made me laugh. Nothing about us had ever been straightforward. Not the first night we met outside the courthouse during a freezing November rainstorm. Not the way he quietly paid my mother's overdue pharmacy bill before we were even dating. Not the way I slowly realized half the men shaking his hand were terrified of him. Graham signed the first page. Then the second. His attention drifted toward his buzzing phone for less than 2 seconds. That was enough. My hand moved beneath the table. Smooth. Practiced. I switched the pens while he glanced at another message lighting up his screen. Federal audit updates. Port delays. Problems stacking on problems. He did not notice. My heart slammed once against my ribs so hard it hurt. Then nothing. Calm. Terrible calm. Graham picked up the blue pen. You will keep the apartment, he said while signing another page. And your mother's treatments stay covered. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I stared at him. What are you talking about? For the first time all night he paused. His eyes finally lifted to mine. Pale gray under the diner lights. Exhausted enough to look human instead of untouchable. Naomi, he said softly. Do not make me say it out loud. The rain hammered harder against the windows. Somewhere outside, a cargo horn echoed through the harbor fog. Graham signed the final page with the blue pen and slid the papers toward me. It is done. I looked down at his signature drying slowly in navy ink. And for one horrible second I almost told him the truth. The call came 3 minutes after I walked out of the diner. The harbor wind cut through my coat hard enough to sting my skin while I stood beside my 12-year-old Honda under a flickering street lamp. My hands were shaking now. Not from guilt. From adrenaline finally catching up to me. Graham stayed inside the diner, still in the booth, one elbow resting against the table while he rubbed his eyes with 2 fingers like a man trying to hold himself together through exhaustion alone. Then my phone vibrated. Vincent Crow. I stared at the screen before answering. Tell me he did not sign with the blue pen, Vincent said immediately. No griting. No hesitación. His voice sounded thin and breathless, buried beneath the noise of traffic and office printers somewhere downtown. I closed my eyes. He signed everything. Silence exploded through the line. I could hear papers shuffling, drawers opening, Vincent muttering curses under his breath. Naomi, he finally whispered. Do you understand what you just triggered? Across the parking lot, the diner door opened. Graham stepped outside, rolling his sleeves down slowly against the cold. He still looked calm. Too calm. It was supposed to activate after the divorce finalized, I said quietly. Not immediately. The emergency succession clause does not care about timing, Vincent snapped. The blue pen was tied to the original authorization records. Legally, the system recognizes those signatures as operational transfer approval. My stomach dropped hard enough to make me grab the hood of my car for balance. Harbor fog drifted across the empty street. Somewhere nearby, metal containers clanged together in the distance. Graham looked up then. His eyes landed on me standing beneath the street lamp with the phone pressed against my ear. Even from 30 feet away, I could feel him studying my face. Reading me. How much? I whispered. Vincent exhaled shakily. Not the whole company, but the Camden shipping line now belongs to you on paper. My pulse stopped. Camden. The only legal branch left untouched by federal investigation. The only division clean enough to keep the company alive if the audits turned criminal. Graham had protected that line personally for years. I heard movement behind Vincent. More voices. Panic spreading through people who never panicked. Vincent, I said carefully. Can this be reversed? Another silence. Longer this time. Maybe, he admitted. But if Vale finds out before morning, everyone in that office is dead professionally. Including me. The diner door slammed shut behind Graham as he crossed the parking lot toward me. Slow steps. Controlled. His coat moved in the wind. No bodyguards tonight. No black SUVs. Just a tired man walking across wet asphalt at midnight after signing away his marriage. I have to go, Vincent muttered. And Naomi? If this was revenge, you picked the worst possible time. The line. Disconnected. Graham stopped a few feet away. Close enough that I could smell rain and cold air clinging to his coat. Something wrong? He asked. I looked at him carefully. The dark circles beneath his eyes. The healing split in his knuckle. The exhaustion he kept hiding behind discipline. For one dangerous second I almost told him everything. Instead, I forced my keys into the car door. No, primelit sufli. Nothing is wrong. Graham watched me another second too long. Then his gaze dropped to my hands. To the navy ink stain near my thumb. Small. Barely visible. But I saw the exact moment he noticed it. His expression did not change. That was the frightening part. Graham Vale never reacted immediately when something mattered. He just looked at me quietly while harbor fog curled around us like smoke. Then he asked very gently, Naomi, where did you get that pen? My mother called while Graham was still staring at the ink stain on my hand. The ringtone cut through the harbor wind sharp enough to make both of us flinch slightly. Darlene Mercer never called this late unless something was wrong. I answered immediately. Mom. Static crackled through the speaker before her tired voice finally came through. Naomi, honey, they almost turned me away tonight. My stomach tightened instantly. Graham's expression changed the second he heard panic in my voice. What happened? I asked, already reaching for my car door. The dialysis center said there was a problem with the insurance authorization. Her breathing sounded weak. Thin. Somebody fixed it after a while, but they kept asking questions about payment transfers. Graham went completely still beside me. Not cold stillness. Recognition. Mom, listen to me carefully, I said. Did they treat you? Yes, sweetheart. A shaky laugh. You sound more scared than I am. Because I understood exactly what had happened. The divorce filing triggered internal asset freezes. Automatic reviews. Which meant somewhere in the middle of this legal disaster, the medical payments Graham had hidden from me for over a year almost collapsed with everything else. Graham looked away toward the harbor, jaw tight enough to twitch once. Beneath the dock lights. Go home, he said quietly. I will handle it. That should have comforted me. Instead, anger rose so suddenly it felt hot under my skin. That is the problem, I snapped. You handle things without telling me. Graham's eyes cut back toward mine immediately. Your mother needed treatment. And I needed honesty. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his coat onto the pavement between us. Would it have changed anything if you knew? He asked. Yes. How? I opened my mouth and realized I had no answer ready. Because the truth was uglier than anger. If I had known he was paying the bills, I would have stayed longer. I hated that possibility enough to feel sick. Graham saw something shift in my face then. Something small but devastating. He stepped closer carefully, like approaching an injured animal. "Naomi," he said softer now. "I never wanted you trapped with me because of money." I laughed once under my breath. Exhausted. Bitter. "You really think that was the only thing trapping me?" His expression faltered for the first time all night. Not dramatic. Just a crack. Tiny. Human. A truck rumbled past at the far end of the harbor road, headlights sliding over Graham's face for half a second before darkness swallowed him again. "You stopped talking to me months ago," he said quietly. "Every time I walked into a room you looked tired. Because I was tired. Of me." The question came too fast. Too honest. It stunned both of us. Graham immediately looked away afterward like he regretted letting it slip out. That was the thing about him. The dangerous man everyone feared could negotiate million-dollar deals without blinking but could barely survive one real emotional sentence. My chest tightened unexpectedly. I was tired of disappearing, I admitted. Every decision in our life already happened before I heard about it. Graham rubbed a hand over his face slowly. "You think I do not know how badly I ruined this?" His voice sounded wrecked now, raw around the edges from exhaustion. "I just never figured out how to stop fixing problems long enough to actually sit beside you in them." Silence settled between us again, but it felt different. This time, less sharp, more dangerous somehow. Because now the truth was standing outside with us in the freezing harbor air. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed a second time immediately after. Graham noticed the fear hit my face before I could hide it. "Who is that?" he asked. I stared at the screen. No caller ID. Just a text preview this time. "We know about Camden." The second text arrived before I could breathe through the first one. "Stop answering unknown numbers." Graham saw the color leave my face immediately. "Give me the phone," he said. Not controlling. Not cold. "Urgent." I should have refused on principle alone, but my hands were already trembling hard enough that I passed it to him without thinking. Graham scanned the screen once. Then again slower. Harbor wind pushed fog across the parking lot, while his jaw tightened by degrees. "This is not random," he muttered. "Somebody inside Camden leaked information fast." "What does that mean?" He looked up at me sharply. "It means whoever sent this knows the transfer is real." The words landed like ice water down my spine. Because until that moment, part of me still believed this could all be reversed quietly before sunrise. A paperwork mistake. A legal glitch. Something Vincent could untangle before the rest of Graham's world noticed. But people were already moving. Fast. Somewhere across the harbor, a freight horn echoed low and mournful through the fog. Graham handed my phone back carefully. "You are not going home alone tonight." The exhaustion and fear twisting inside me finally snapped into anger again. "You do not get to decide that anymore." "Naomi." "No," I stepped backward toward my car. "We are divorced now, remember?" Something painful crossed his face at the word divorced. Tiny. Barely there. But I saw it. Graham Vale looked like a man who could survive federal agents, strikes, and criminals circling his company like sharks. Yet one legal word still managed to wound him. His phone started vibrating next. He checked the screen and cursed softly under his breath for the first time in years. "What?" I asked despite myself. "Container 42 at Camden is missing." Missing. It left the yard 30 minutes ago without authorization. My stomach dropped again. Graham was already moving, pacing once across the wet pavement while answering another incoming call. His entire posture changed. Straighter. Colder. Like he was forcing himself back into the version of him the city expected. "Lock every outbound gate," he ordered into the phone. "I do not care who complains. Nobody leaves that port until I say so." He listened another second before hanging up abruptly. "I need to go." "Graham." He stopped. Rain dripped from his dark hair onto his collar while traffic hissed somewhere beyond the harbor road. "If this leak spreads," he said quietly, "the Camden line becomes a target by morning. Competitors. Auditors. Maybe worse. Because my name is attached now. Yes. He did not soften the truth. That almost hurt more. Then tell me what is inside container 42. Graham hesitated. Actual hesitation. Medical refrigeration units, he finally said. Hospital shipments. I stared at him. You are telling me somebody stole medical equipment? I am telling you people panic when ownership changes. He rubbed his eyes hard with one hand. And panic makes desperate men stupid. Another text buzzed onto my phone before either of us could speak again. This one included a photograph. My apartment building. Taken from across the street less than 5 minutes ago. The air disappeared from my lungs. Graham saw the image instantly. Every trace of exhaustion vanished from his face. Get in the car, he said. I had heard him negotiate with union bosses and threaten corrupt contractors before. I had never heard this tone. Pure fear hidden beneath control. Graham. Naomi, please. The word please stunned me more than the photo did. Because Graham almost never begged for anything. Harbor lights reflected across the wet pavement between us while his breathing stayed measured by force alone. Then his phone rang again. Ezra. Graham answered immediately. I heard shouting through the speaker before Graham even spoke. His younger brother sounded panicked. Disoriented. They know about Camden, Ezra slurred. Leon Baptiste already. Knows your wife owns it now. Graham went completely still. Ezra, he said carefully, what exactly did you tell Leon? Silence. Then a broken laugh from the other end. I think I made a mistake. By 2 a.m, I was sitting inside a 24-hour laundromat 3 blocks from my apartment while industrial dryers rattled hard enough to shake the plastic chairs beneath us. Graham stood near the front windows with his phone pressed against his ear, speaking low and fast while blue fluorescent light drained all the color from his face. I had refused to go to his place, refused the security team, refused the black SUVs he finally admitted were parked nearby. So this became our compromise. A laundromat that smelled like detergent and overheated metal, while strangers folded towels around us pretending not to notice the tension hanging in the air. Across the room, a woman rocked a crying toddler against her shoulder, while quarters clinked into washing machines one after another. Real life continuing while mine quietly collapsed. Graham ended another call and walked toward me slowly. Camden workers are already hearing rumors, he said. Somebody leaked the ownership transfer online. I stared at him. Online where? Doc forums. Labor boards. Rede de reais. He sounded disgusted by the words themselves. By morning, every contractor in Baltimore will know my ex-wife controls the only clean route left in the company. Ex-wife. The word hit differently now. Sharper. More permanent. I looked down at the wrinkled receipt in my hands from the vending machine near the door. $2.75 for stale crackers I had not touched. Then why are you still here? I asked quietly. Graham frowned slightly. What? If this destroys your reputation, why are you sitting in a laundromat with me instead of fixing it? For a second he just looked tired enough to tell the truth. Because somebody took pictures outside your apartment. The dryers hummed loudly behind us. A teenager in a Ravens hoodie walked past carrying a basket of sheets. Graham lowered himself into the plastic chair across from me with a stiffness that made me realize how exhausted his body really was. He stretched one hand against his lower back unconsciously before catching himself. Pain. Old pain maybe. Another thing he never talked about. Ezra is spiraling, he admitted quietly. He owes people money again. I blinked. What kind of people? Graham gave a humorless smile. The kind who know my family name opens doors. That explained the panic in Ezra's voice earlier. The slurred words. The guilt. I leaned back slowly, staring at the spinning dryers. How bad is it? Bad enough that Leon Baptiste probably offered him cash for information. And your brother took it. Graham rubbed both hands over his face hard enough to redden the skin beneath his eyes. Ezra was not built for this world. There was no anger in his voice when he said it. Just sadness. Heavy. Familiar sadness. Neither was I, he added after a moment. The honesty startled me enough to look up sharply. Graham let out a quiet breath. You think I wanted this life? You chose it. No, his eyes met mine directly now. I inherited survival and called it ambition because it sounded cleaner. Something inside my chest shifted painfully, because suddenly I could see him younger, tired, terrified of becoming his father, building control out of fear until it swallowed everything around him. His phone buzzed again across the table. This time he ignored it. "The board wants an emergency meeting at 8, he muttered. "They are already asking whether the transfer makes me unstable." I almost laughed from disbelief. "You run half the harbor and they think divorce makes you unstable?" No, Graham's expression darkened. "They think loving someone enough to lose leverage over them makes me weak." Silence settled between us again, but this one felt uglier. Not intimate. Exposed. The dryers finally stopped spinning behind me with a loud mechanical thud. Then my own phone lit up across the chair beside me. A new message from an unknown number. No words this time. Just a photograph of my mother stepping out of the dialysis center earlier that night. The picture of my mother disappeared from my screen 3 seconds after it arrived. No threat. No message. Just enough to let me know somebody was watching her movements in real time. My throat closed instantly. Across from me, Graham noticed before I even handed him the phone. He studied the image once, then looked toward the laundromat windows automatically like he was calculating sightlines and exits without thinking. Years of survival disguised as instinct. "We are leaving," he said calmly. Not aggressive. Certain. I should have argued. Normally I would have. But fear changes the body before it changes the mind. My hands had already gone numb. Graham stood and grabbed my coat from the chair beside him before I could reach for it myself. The motion felt painfully familiar. 8 years of small automatic care. He always remembered the things I forgot when I was stressed. My gloves. My medication refills. Extra batteries for the apartment smoke detector. The problem was that he remembered practical things better than emotional ones. We stepped outside into freezing early morning air. The laundromat sign buzzed red behind us while trucks rolled through distant harbor streets carrying shipments toward dawn markets. Graham guided me toward a dark gray pickup parked half a block away. Not one of the expensive vehicles I expected. This truck looked old enough to belong to a construction worker. Rust near the wheel wells. Coffee stains on the console. "This is yours?" I asked quietly as he unlocked the passenger door. "I use it at the docks." For some reason, that detail hurt unexpectedly. Because I had spent years believing there were entire parts of his life he deliberately kept hidden from me. But standing there beside an old pickup with cracked leather seats and a Orioles keychain hanging from the ignition, I realized some things had not been hidden. I had simply stopped looking long ago. Graham started the engine. The heater rattled loudly before weak warmth finally pushed through the vents. Neither of us spoke while the truck pulled onto empty industrial roads near the harbor. Then his phone rang again through the speakers. "Ezra." Graham answered immediately this time. "Tell me where you are." Ezra sounded exhausted. "Sick maybe." "Leon wants a meeting," he mumbled. "He thinks Naomi cannot handle Camden." "And what did you tell him?" Graham asked evenly. Silence stretched too long. Then Ezra laughed weakly. "I told him you still love her." My chest tightened painfully beside him. Graham's grip on the steering wheel shifted once. That was all. "Ezra, he thinks that makes you dangerous," his brother continued quietly. "Not weak. Dangerous. Because people who stop caring about money are unpredictable." The call disconnected abruptly after that. Graham stared straight ahead at the road without blinking for several seconds. Freight trains clattered somewhere nearby beyond chain-link fences covered in rust and old Union stickers. Finally I spoke. "Is it true?" Graham exhaled slowly through his nose. "What part?" "That you still love me." He did not answer immediately. Typical Graham. Careful even when exhausted. Especially when exhausted. The truck stopped at a red light beside a shuttered bait shop near the docks. Neon beer signs flickered weakly behind dusty windows. Graham rested both hands against the steering wheel like he suddenly needed the support. "I never signed those papers because I stopped loving you," he admitted quietly. "I signed them because every time you looked at me lately, you seemed unhappy to still belong to my life." The honesty landed harder than yelling ever could have. I looked down at my hands in my lap. I did not want to belong to your world anymore, I whispered. Graham nodded once. Slow. Painfully accepting. I know. Then after a long silence he added softly, I just did not realize you thought those were the same thing. At 6:30 in the morning, my face was already on local news websites. Not fully. Just enough to ruin a normal life forever. A grainy photo taken outside the diner showed me climbing into Graham's truck beneath the headline. Divorce transfer throws logistics and chaos. By the time we reached the small marina motel outside Dundalk, my phone would not stop vibrating. Unknown numbers. Reporters. One voicemail from my office asking whether I planned to come in today or deal with the scandal first. Graham parked beside a row of faded white motel doors facing the water. Fishing boats rocked slowly against the docks behind the building while gulls screamed overhead. The place smelled like old wood and salt water. Cheap. Quiet. Odyssey. Exactly the kind of place nobody important would think to search first. You stayed here before, I realized as Graham unlocked the room. He glanced back briefly. During strikes at the port. Inside, the room looked painfully ordinary. Floral bedspread. Tiny television bolted to the dresser. A Bible inside the nightstand drawer. I stood frozen near the door while Graham checked the locks automatically. You should sleep for an hour, he said without turning around. I cannot sleep. You have not stopped shaking since the laundromat. He was right. I hated that he was right. Graham pulled off his coat and draped it over the chair near the window. Underneath, his white dress shirt looked wrinkled for the first time I could remember. His shoulders seemed heavier now without the armor of expensive wool and control. His phone buzzed again across the table. He ignored it. Then it rang immediately after. This time he answered. What? Vincent's voice exploded loud enough that I could hear him from across the room. The board froze your voting rights pending review. Graham closed his eyes briefly. Of course they did. And Leon Baptiste is buying union support already. Half the dock workers think Camden is collapsing. I watched Graham lean one hand against the dresser slowly like his body suddenly weighed too much. How bad? He asked quietly. Vincent hesitated. Bad enough that some people are asking whether Naomi manipulated you intentionally. Shame twisted through me instantly. Because technically, I had. Graham looked toward me then. Really looked. I waited for anger, accusation, regret. Instead he said flatly into the phone, nobody touches her reputation publicly. Handle it. My chest tightened unexpectedly. Graham, Vincent warned carefully, protecting her right now makes you look compromised. I do not care. The room went silent after that. Graham ended the call before Vincent could argue further. I stared at him across the motel room while weak morning sunlight crawled across the carpet between us. You should care, I whispered. Your company is falling apart. It was already falling apart. His answer came too fast. Too tired to be guarded anymore. He sat down slowly on the edge of the second bed and rubbed both hands over his face. You think this started with the divorce? His laugh sounded hollow. Naomi, I have spent 2 years trying to keep federal audits away from men who can barely pay rent if the dock's close. That stopped me. Graham rarely talked about the workers directly. Not emotionally. Container shipping dropped almost 30% last winter, he continued quietly. Half the independent drivers are behind on mortgages. The union blames automation. The board blames labor. Everybody wants someone to punish. He looked up finally. Then suddenly my wife takes control of Camden overnight. Wife. Not ex-wife this time. Something fragile moved painfully through my chest. People need a villain, he finished softly. Outside the motel window, I watched a fisherman untangle nets beside the dock in freezing morning air. Real people. Real bills. Real lives tied to all of this. For the first time since the diner, I understood the actual scale of what my choice had touched. Not just Graham. Hundreds of workers. Families. Insurance. Routes. Hospital shipments. My throat tightened. I did not know it would spread this far. Graham studied me quietly for a long moment. I know, he said. And somehow that forgiveness felt worse than blame. The first protest started before noon outside Camden Terminal. By 1 o'clock, Local news vans lined the harbor road while dockworkers in reflective jackets argued behind temporary barricades. Somebody had leaked internal payroll rumors online overnight. Men thought layoffs were coming. Drivers thought routes would shut down. Nobody trusted management anymore. And somehow my name sat in the middle of all of it like a lit match thrown into gasoline. Graham drove us toward the terminal in silence while radio hosts dissected our divorce like entertainment between traffic reports. "You should not go in there," I said quietly from the passenger seat. "If you disappear now it gets worse," he answered. His voice sounded drained raw from lack of sleep. "They need to see somebody standing upright." The closer we got to Camden, the tighter my chest became. Forklifts moved between shipping stacks while angry clusters of workers gathered near the main gates holding handwritten signs. "Keep Camden working. No more corporate games." One older man slammed his fist against a fence while cameras filmed him shouting about mortgage payments and health insurance. Real fear. Not theatrics. Graham parked beside the administration building and immediately reached for the door. "Stay inside." "Absolutely not." He looked at me sharply. "Naomi. My name is already attached to this mess." I grabbed my coat tighter. People deserve to see me too. Something unreadable crossed his face then. Not approval exactly, but respect maybe. We stepped out into freezing harbor wind and the noise hit instantly. Reporters shouting questions. Workers arguing. Trucks idling nearby. Graham moved through the chaos with controlled focus while security scrambled behind him trying to contain the crowd. Then someone recognized me. "That is her." The shift happened fast after that. Faces turning. Voices rising. A younger dockworker pushed forward through the crowd holding a crumpled payroll printout. "My wife is 8 months pregnant," he shouted toward me. "Are we losing insurance because of your divorce?" The words hit like a punch. More voices followed immediately. "What happens to overtime? Who owns Camden now? Are routes shutting down?" I froze because I did not know the answers. That was the worst part. Graham stepped slightly in front of me instinctively, but I moved around him before he could shield me completely. "Nobody is shutting Camden down," I said loudly, forcing my voice steady. "The medical routes are still active." "For now," somebody yelled back. Another worker spat near the pavement. "Easy for rich people to say." Rich people. I almost laughed at the irony. Graham's expression darkened instantly at the hostility around me. "Enough," he said sharply. The crowd quieted just enough for his voice to carry. "Nobody loses jobs today." "Can you promise that?" An older driver shouted. Graham hesitated. Tiny. Brief. But enough. Workers noticed immediately. Fear spread faster than anger after that. People started talking over each other again. Somebody cursed at the board. Somebody blamed automation. Somebody blamed Graham directly. Then a plastic water bottle flew from somewhere near the back of the crowd. It hit the pavement beside my feet hard enough to explode dirty water across my jeans. Security surged forward instantly. Graham grabbed my arm on reflex and pulled me behind him. "We are leaving," he muttered tightly. No, the word surprised both of us. My heart hammered painfully, but I stayed where I was. Because for the first time since the diner, I finally understood what he had been carrying alone for years. Not power. Responsibility. Pressure from every direction. Men depending on him while hating him at the same time. Graham stared at me in disbelief while harbor wind whipped loose hair across my face. "You cannot fix this by protecting me from it," I said quietly enough that only he could hear. His jaw tightened hard. "And you cannot survive this world by standing still while people throw things at you. Then stop treating me like glass." That hit him. I saw it instantly. The exhaustion. The fear. The helplessness he buried beneath control finally cracking open in public where he hated vulnerability most. Graham leaned closer, voice dangerously low now. "You think this is about pride?" "Naomi, I watched a man get dragged out of a truck during the last labor riot. Because somebody thought he crossed the wrong line." My breath caught. "You never told me that." "Because you already looked afraid every time I came home late." Silence crashed between us for half a second while shouting continued around the gates. Then Graham said the one thing I never expected to hear from him. "I do not know how to keep you safe without making you hate me for it." The board suspended Graham 3 hours later. Not quietly either. Somebody leaked the emergency meeting summary before sunset, and by evening every business site in Maryland carried the same headline beside his photo. Vail Logistics CEO removed during internal review. I read it sitting alone in the motel room, while the television flickered blue against the walls. Graham had not come back yet. After the confrontation at Camden, he stayed behind handling reporters, union representatives, and whatever legal fires were spreading through the company. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from coworkers pretending concern while fishing for details. Tessa finally texted the truth directly. Are you safe or are you just with him again? I stared at the words for a long time without answering, because I honestly did not know anymore. The motel heater clicked loudly beside the bed while outside the marina parking lot filled with charter boats returning before dark. Men carried coolers across cracked asphalt talking about weather and fuel prices like the world was still normal. I envied them so much it physically hurt. Around 7:30, the motel door finally opened. Graham stepped inside looking 10 years older than he had that morning. His tie was gone completely now. Sleeves rolled unevenly. There was dried blood near one cuff where his knuckles had split open again somehow. Not from fighting. From stress maybe. He carried a plastic grocery bag and set it quietly on the table near me. You did not eat earlier, he said automatically. Turkey sandwiches. Bottled water. Ibuprofen. The same practical care as always. My chest tightened despite myself. Graham sat down heavily in the chair near the window and pressed both palms against his eyes for several long seconds. Silence stretched between us while the television kept talking about his collapse like entertainment. You should clean your hand, I said finally. He glanced down at the split skin like he had forgotten it existed. It is fine. No, it is not. My voice came out sharper than intended. Graham looked at me tiredly. Nothing is fine right now, Naomi. The exhaustion in his voice stripped something raw open inside me, because he sounded less like a powerful man losing control, and more like someone who had been carrying too much weight for too long. Still, that did not erase what our marriage had become. I stood, grabbed the motel bathroom towel, and soaked it under warm water. Graham watched silently while I knelt beside the chair and pressed the cloth carefully against his knuckles. He flinched slightly. Sorry, I murmured automatically. You always apologize when you help people, he said quietly. I paused. That is not true. It is. His tired eyes stayed on my face. Like you think caring for someone is already asking too much from them. The observation hit too close. I pulled my hand back first. Do not psychoanalyze me in a motel room after destroying our marriage. Graham leaned back slowly, jaw tightening despite the exhaustion. You think I destroyed it alone? Anger sparked instantly now. Real anger. Not fear. You made every decision without me for years. Because every time I told you the truth about this business, you looked at me like you regretted marrying me. Because I was terrified all the time. My voice cracked louder than I intended. You disappeared for nights. People followed us. I stopped knowing whether you were protecting our life or controlling it. Graham stood too fast at that. The chair scraped hard against the floor. You think I enjoyed becoming this person? His breathing roughened now for the first time. Do you know what happens when men like Leon smell weakness? Then why stay in that world? I shot back immediately. Why keep choosing it over us? Graham opened his mouth and stopped. Completely stopped. Because for once there was no good answer ready. Only truth. He looked away first. I did not know who I was without it, he admitted quietly. The room went still after that. No dramatic breakthrough. No instant forgiveness. Just two exhausted people finally standing in the wreckage honestly enough to see it clearly. My eyes burned unexpectedly. That does not fix anything, I whispered. I know. Graham's voice sounded hollow now. But it is the first honest thing I have said in a long time. Then his phone buzzed again across the table. This time when he looked at the screen, every trace of exhaustion vanished from his face instantly. What happened? I asked. Graham stared at the message for one long second before answering. Ezra is missing. We found Ezra's truck abandoned behind a pharmacy at 1:15 in the morning. The driver's side door hung half open beneath a broken parking lot light, while empty prescription bottles rolled around the floorboard every time the wind shook the vehicle. Graham did not say a word when he saw it. He just stood there beside the truck with both hands in his coat pockets staring at the mess inside like he had expected this eventually. That somehow made it worse. The neighborhood around us looked exhausted. Closed laundromats. Flickering liquor store signs. Snow-blackened sidewalks piled with dirty slush near the curbs. Somewhere down the block, a couple argued loudly through an apartment window, while an ambulance siren wailed faintly in the distance. Real city noise. Real people falling apart quietly at 2 in the morning. Graham opened the glove compartment carefully. Inside sat a folded rehab intake brochure crumpled beneath unpaid parking tickets. I watched his expression shift when he saw it. Not shock. Grief. "He picked this up 3 weeks ago," he muttered. "He told me he was doing better." His voice sounded almost embarrassed by the hope underneath it. I leaned against the truck beside him. Addiction does not move in straight lines. Graham gave a tired nod without looking at me. Neither do families. His phone kept vibrating with calls from board members and lawyers. This time he silenced every single one. Then, without a word, he pulled a trash bag from the back seat and started cleaning Ezra's truck himself. Fast food wrappers. Old receipts. Half-empty energy drinks. I stared at him in disbelief for a second. "What are you doing? If the police tow it like this, they will inventory everything." He tossed another handful of garbage into the bag. "Ezra does not need more humiliation right now." So I helped. Not because everything between us was fixed. Not because I suddenly forgave years of silence and control. But because standing beside him while he quietly cleaned his brother's mess in the freezing cold felt more honest than half the conversations we had shared during our marriage. We worked without speaking for nearly 20 minutes. Graham found an overdue electric bill shoved beneath the passenger seat and folded it carefully into his pocket instead of throwing it away. That detail hurt my chest unexpectedly, because even now, exhausted and publicly collapsing, he was still trying to protect the people he loved from practical consequences first. That was who Graham was at his core. Not soft, not expressive, just relentlessly responsible until it slowly destroyed him. "He started using after the back injury," Graham said suddenly while wiping dust off the dashboard with an old towel from the truck bed. "Painkillers after surgery." I glanced toward him quietly. Why did he not stay in rehab? Graham laughed once under his breath. "Bitter. Same reason I stayed in the docks too long." He shut the truck door harder than necessary. "Men in my family treat survival like proof we are fine." The honesty sat heavily between us while freezing wind pushed litter across the parking lot. Then his phone rang again. Vincent this time. Graham almost ignored it before finally answering. "What?" Vincent sounded exhausted too. "The board-approved emergency restructuring." Graham's jaw tightened instantly. Meaning Leon Baptiste just offered to buy part of Camden publicly. My stomach dropped. "Can he do that?" I asked before Graham could answer. Vincent heard me through the speaker. "If enough investors panic, yes." Graham leaned against Ezra's truck slowly like fatigue had finally reached his bones. "How long?" 48 hours maybe before the banks start pressuring the board. Silence followed. Then Graham looked down at the trash bag still hanging from his hand. Old receipts. Empty bottles. Pieces of a life quietly unraveling. "I cannot do this tonight," he said finally. Not angry. Just humanly tired. Vincent stopped talking immediately. Graham rarely admitted weakness out loud. "Find Ezra," he added quietly. "Everything else waits until morning." He hung up before anyone could argue. For a long moment neither of us moved. Then Graham walked to the nearby gas station convenience store without explanation. He came back carrying 2 microwaved breakfast sandwiches and a cheap phone charger. He handed me the charger first. "Your battery is at 12%, he said automatically. I stared at the charger in my hand longer than necessary because suddenly I remembered something painful. 8 years together, and this was how Graham always apologized. Never speeches. Never flowers. Just small acts that said, "I noticed you still need something." We found Ezra asleep in the waiting room of an urgent care clinic just before sunrise. Not unconscious. Not dramatic. Just slumped sideways across 2 plastic chairs beneath a flickering television playing morning weather forecasts to nobody. His boots were muddy. His sweatshirt smelled like cigarette smoke and antiseptic. One of his hands still had a hospital wristband attached from somewhere earlier that night. Graham stopped walking the second he saw him. Relief crossed his face so fast it almost looked painful. Ezra blinked awake slowly when the automatic doors hissed behind us. His eyes landed on Graham first. Shame hit immediately after. "I was going to call," he muttered hoarsely. Graham sat down beside him without hesitation. "You are freezing." That was his first response. Not anger. Not disappointment. Ezra rubbed both hands over his face hard enough to redden his skin. Leon wanted names. I gave him too much. Graham nodded once like he already knew. "I know. I screwed this up." "Yes." Ezra looked up sharply at the blunt honesty. Graham leaned forward with both forearms resting against his knees. Exhausted men in wrinkled clothes sitting beneath fluorescent lights, while a nurse argued quietly with somebody at the reception desk about insurance coverage. Nothing cinematic about it. Just family damage at 5:40 in the morning. "You are still coming home," Graham said quietly. Ezra laughed weakly. To what home? The question sat heavier than he probably intended. Because suddenly nobody really had one anymore. Not Graham with the board stripping away his company piece by piece. Not me living out of motel rooms avoiding reporters. Not Ezra drifting between painkillers and debt collectors. Graham stared at the scuffed floor tiles for several long seconds before answering. "We figure that part out later." It was such an uncharacteristically uncertain thing for him to say that both Ezra and I looked at him differently afterward. Graham always had plans. Backup plans. Control. But now exhaustion had finally worn him down to something more honest. A man improvising through collapse instead of commanding it. Ezra swallowed hard. "I do not think I can fix this." "That is not your job right now." Graham stood and handed his brother the breakfast sandwich he never ate earlier. "Your job is staying alive long enough to try again tomorrow." Ezra stared at the sandwich like it physically hurt him. Then he took it with shaking hands. I looked away because suddenly the intimacy of the moment felt too private. Outside the clinic windows, the sky slowly turned pale gray above the harbor. Commuters stopped for gas across the street. Somebody scraped ice off a windshield with an old rewards card. Life continuing around us while we sat inside the aftermath of choices none of us knew how to undo. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. "Sweetheart," she said carefully the second I answered. "There are reporters outside my building." Fear punched through me instantly. Graham heard it in my voice before I even explained. He was already standing by the door pulling on his coat. "Do not leave the apartment," I told my mother quickly. "Lock the door and do not answer anyone." "Naomi." Her voice softened painfully. "Are you in danger?" I hesitated too long. Graham took my keys gently from my hand while I was still talking and walked outside toward the truck without interrupting. Practical. Immediate. Moving before panic could settle. "I am handling it." I lied quietly into the phone. After I hung up, I followed him outside into the freezing morning air. Graham was scraping frost off the windshield with his sleeve because neither of us could find the ice scraper. I stood there watching him struggle with something so stupidly ordinary that my chest tightened unexpectedly. This man could negotiate million-dollar shipping contracts, but had somehow lost an argument against frozen glass at 6 in the morning. "You are doing it wrong," I muttered automatically. Graham glanced over, tired enough to almost smile. I grabbed the old Orioles keychain from the ignition and used the flat metal edge instead. Better leverage. Less streaking. Graham watched quietly while I worked. "You still remember how?" he said softly. I looked at the half-cleared windshield. Some things do not disappear just because people get divorced. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Silence settled between us after that. Not warm exactly. Not healed. But softer than before. Then I accidentally cut my thumb on the edge of the keychain. Damn it. Graham reached for my hand instantly on instinct alone. We both froze the second his fingers closed around mine. The cut on my thumb was tiny. Barely more than a thin red line across the skin. But Graham still held my hand like it mattered. Not tightly. Not possessively. Just steady while cold morning air moved around us in the clinic parking lot. "You still never pay attention to sharp edges," he muttered automatically. The word startled a laugh out of me before I could stop it. Small. Tired. Real. Graham looked almost surprised to hear it too. For one strange second we did not feel like enemies or headlines or collapsing marriages. Just two exhausted people standing beside an old truck at sunrise. Then he let go first. That mattered too. Graham had spent years gripping situations too hard out of fear they would disappear if he loosened his hold. But this time he stepped back on his own. Space instead of control. Choice instead of pressure. We drove my mother home just after 7. The reporters were still outside her apartment complex exactly like she warned us. 2 vans parked near the curb. Cameras waiting beside folding chairs and empty fast food bags. Graham slowed the truck before turning onto the street. You do not have to get out, he said quietly. I looked at him. Neither do you. He nodded once. Then parked anyway. The second reporters recognized him. Microphones appeared instantly. Questions flew from every direction. Did your ex-wife take Camden intentionally? Are layoffs coming? Did the board remove you because of personal instability? Graham ignored every single one while helping my mother carry her grocery bags from the truck. Not rushing. Not performing for cameras. Just quietly walking. Beside a tired woman with weak kidneys up 3 icy apartment steps. I watched reporters lower their microphones slightly in confusion. That was the thing about Graham. People expected violence or arrogance because fear was easier to package than complexity. They never saw this part. The man who noticed my mother's front porch light flickering and changed the bulb himself without being asked. The man who carried heavy laundry baskets because her back hurt. The man who always filled her freezer with microwave dinners before winter storms. Inside the apartment, my mother stared at both of us carefully while Graham fixed the loose chain lock near her front door using a screwdriver he found in the kitchen junk drawer. You two look terrible, she announced finally. I almost smiled. Graham actually did this time. Brief. Crooked. Human. That seems fair, he admitted. My mother handed him a mug of instant coffee afterward like he still belonged there. That nearly broke me emotionally for reasons I could not fully explain. Graham sat at the tiny kitchen table beneath humming fluorescent lights while my mother sorted prescription bottles beside him. No expensive suits anymore. No boardroom authority. Just rolled sleeves and exhaustion. You should sleep eventually, she scolded him gently. Both of you. Graham rubbed his eyes once. Working on it. Then his phone buzzed again across the table. He glanced at the screen and immediately turned it face down instead of answering. I noticed because old Graham never ignored business calls. Not for anything. You are not picking up? I asked quietly. He looked at me for a long second before answering. Not right now. Simple words. But they carried the weight of somebody choosing differently on purpose for the first time. My chest tightened painfully. Later, while my mother napped in the recliner near the television, I found Graham standing alone on the apartment balcony staring down at the parking lot below. Not dramatic. Just thinking. The winter air had turned his hands red from cold. The board will punish you for disappearing today, I said softly beside him. Probably. And you still stayed. Graham looked out toward the distant harbor where cranes moved slowly against the pale morning sky. I spent years believing love meant solving problems before people could feel them, he admitted quietly. Turns out that mostly just makes people feel invisible. I swallowed hard. You cannot fix 8 years in one weekend. I know. He finally looked at me then. Tired. Honest. No ownership left in his expression now. No expectation. I just want the chance to stop making the same mistakes if you ever decide I still belong in your life. The freedom in that sentence hurt more than pressure ever did. Because for the first time since I met Graham Vale, he was not asking me to stay. He was leaving the choice entirely in my hands. 3 months later, Camden still smelled like diesel, salt water, and overheated machinery. Some things never changed. Forklifts still screamed across the loading yard before sunrise. Dock workers still complained about overtime near the vending machines. The coffee inside the dispatch office still tasted burned no matter who made it. But other things had changed slowly. Quietly. The kind of change nobody notices until enough time passes to compare old scars against new habits. Graham no longer ran Vale Logistics. The board forced him out 6 weeks after the divorce finalized officially. Leon Baptiste bought part of the company exactly like Vincent predicted, though not enough to control everything. Camden survived barely. Smaller routes, fewer contracts, harder oversight from federal auditors. Nobody got rich anymore. But most workers kept their jobs. That mattered more than headlines ever did. I stood inside the small legal clinic near the harbor flipping the sign from closed to open while rain boots squeaked across the tile floor behind me. Tuesdays were tenant dispute days. Wednesdays belonged to dockworkers fighting denied insurance claims. The clinic was not glamorous. Half the chairs did not match. The heater rattled constantly. But people came. Real people carrying unpaid bills and folded envelopes. People too embarrassed to ask questions anywhere else. Tessa leaned out from her office holding a stack of paperwork. "Your 9 o'clock is already here," she warned. And somebody spilled soup in the hallway again. I sighed automatically and grabbed paper towels from beneath the sink. Normal problems. Honest problems. I had learned to love them. Around noon, the front bell above the clinic door rang softly. I looked up from the copier expecting another client. Instead, Graham stepped inside carrying a cardboard box full of old file folders against his chest. Cold winter air followed him into the room. He looked different now. Lighter maybe. Not happier exactly. Just less armored. The expensive coats were gone. Today he wore an old navy work jacket with grease stains near one sleeve, and looked like somebody who finally slept more than 4 hours a night. "Your receptionist said these belonged to you," he said quietly. "Storage unit records from the old apartment." I wiped toner dust off my hands before taking the box. "You could have dropped them off later. I was nearby." He always said that now instead of creating excuses to stay longer. Nearby. Your choice. Small changes. Real changes. Tessa disappeared into the back office suspiciously fast after spotting him. Smart woman. Graham glanced around the clinic slowly, while a middle-aged dockworker argued with an insurance representative over speakerphone in the next room. "You built this fast," he said. "People needed it fast." He nodded once like he understood that better now. For a second neither of us spoke. The silence no longer felt sharp, just careful. Like both of us still respected how easily old wounds reopened if handled recklessly. Graham reached into his jacket pocket then and pulled out the navy fountain pen. The same one from the diner. He set it gently beside the copier between us. "Found this in my truck," he said. I stared at the pen for a long moment. "You should keep it." No, his voice stayed calm. "Certain. I spent too many years signing things for both of us." My chest tightened unexpectedly. Behind him, somebody laughed loudly in the hallway, while the clinic heater clicked on again. Real life surrounding the moment instead of dramatic music and impossible promises. Graham rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly before continuing. "I still do not know exactly what we become after this. Honest. No speeches. No grand declarations. But I know I do not want love to feel like ownership ever again." I looked at him carefully then. At the tired lines near his eyes. The roughness still left in him. The fact that he no longer tried to solve every problem before asking what I wanted first. Healing had not made him perfect. It just made him more aware of the damage he could cause if he stopped listening. I picked up the pen slowly and turned it between my fingers. "You know," I said softly, "most people think the divorce destroyed everything." Graham's mouth curved slightly. "Did it?" I thought about the motel room. Ezra in urgent care. My mother's apartment. The laundromat. The harbor. All the versions of us that had finally stopped pretending survival and love were the same thing. Then I looked back at him. "No," iyan suara tunasli. "I think it finally forced us to read what we were signing."